Cotton Country. I'm Rebekah Davis. I'm a Rhodes Scholar with the Alabama Humanities Foundation, and I am an owner of this Cooking in Cotton Country, a recipe book published in the 1970s by the Junior League of Morgan County. And each month, we're opening the pages to try out another recipe of this good old Southern cooking. So today we're going to be making squash casserole. But before we get started with the cooking, we're going to go out to the garden to learn a little bit more about squash and its place in American history. So let's go. Welcome to my little garden. As you can see, I've got 4 square foot garden boxes in the backyard, and this is where I grow my little produce, and this is where I've grown the squash that we're going to use in this recipe today. And so that's down there at the end. I'll show you after I tell you just a little bit first about squash. So the very humble, low growing squash actually has a very important role in American history. Even though it may not be as celebrated as, King Cotton, it still has its role. It's one of the few plants that we still grow today and use quite a bit that is native to the Americas. In fact, there's evidence of squash growing in Central America and back in Mexico as far back as 7000 BC. And the word actually comes from a native term, Algonquin term, askoot, asquash, which means eaten green. The first European settlers that came here, when they first saw the natives eating this, they turned their nose up at it and thought, we don't want to eat that, until they got hungry enough, and then they decided, maybe it's not so bad after all, especially once they learned the way the natives grew it. They were called the 3 sisters: corn, beans, and squash. And in fact, Lewis and Clark mentioned corn, beans, and squash. In 1804, Clark recorded in his journal that the Arikara tribe raised these 3 sisters. And you can actually still see an image of someone planting the 3 sisters on the back of the Sacagawea dollar that still exists today. So the 3 sisters benefit each other in that corn provides a structure for the beans to climb on, beans provide nitrogen to the soil that other plants use, and squash spreads along the ground. It blocks out the sunlight, it helps to prevent the establishment of weeds, and the squash leaves even act as sort of a living mulch that retains moisture in the soils, and the plants themselves are very prickly, and that deters pests from eating squash too. The corn, beans, and squash all contain complex carbohydrates, essential fatty acids, and 9 essential amino acids, so they're actually pretty good for you. Now, when you pull on up a little closer than 7000 BC to the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, squash was an important truck farming crop. In the late 1800s to mid 1900s, many people in Alabama, when they filled out their census forms and identified what career path they were on, they identified as truck farmers, which basically meant they grew vegetables to truck to town. And all kinds of squash, corn, beans, watermelons, anything you can find at a farmer's market today. It was a way to diversify from growing something besides just cotton, especially if you had a small farm. And it really contributed to the farm to city road movement. In fact, Coleman County has the most road mileage per capita in Alabama, and part of that is because it was a farming community. It had a lot of truck farms. It was also home to the famous governor, Big Jim Folsom, a larger-than-life character who also made road improvement a core plank of his platform. And so, of course, his home county had to have plenty of roads for the trucks to get to town with their produce. You can actually learn more about the Good Roads movement that even preceded Folsom and that he grew out of if you take a look at Rhodes scholar Marty Olive's book, Getting Out of the Mud, the Alabama Good Roads Movement and Highway Administration. And I'll go ahead and give a little plug for Marty. He also has a Rhodes Scholar presentation about that. So book him, learn more about the roads that brought squash to the market. And as you can see in this picture from 1939 in Limestone County, farmers gathered on the square. You can actually see their bushel baskets there in the back of some of the trucks, and they would trade their goods and their produce and so on up on the square. Over the years, the truck farming moved to the farmers market. And to this day, you can still go to the farmer's market in Athens on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, and folks are still selling squash and all kinds of other vegetables out of their trucks, as they are in farmers markets all across the state. Now, the thing about squash, you gotta pick it before it gets too big and too tough. Otherwise, it's not gonna be any good. It's gonna be stringy, the rind's gonna be tough, no good. You don't wanna pick it too small when it doesn't have any flavor, but you definitely wanna pick it before it gets too big. You can keep it in the fridge for a week before you cook it, or if you want to freeze it, you can blanch it for a couple minutes and freeze it. You can also can it, and that's good for if you're making something like what we're making today, squash casserole or squash balls, something where it's gonna be mashed anyways. But now if you're gonna make fried squash, you need to just cut it up fresh, bread it, and fry it while it's still crisp tender. And squash is really good for you. It's high in vitamin C. It's great roasted, grilled, or fried. And of course, it's good in the casserole that we're gonna make today. So let's go take a look at our squash before we go inside. My squash is at the end of my square foot gardens, and you can see there's some peeking up in under the leaves right there. Looks like they're just about ready to pick. So the recipe that we're going to be making today is on page 197 of Cotton Country Cooking. There's actually several recipes for squash, including a couple for squash casserole, but the one we're going to use was submitted by Mrs. Dan M. Crane. And she said this is a very pretty casserole with a delightful flavor. So let's see if she's telling the truth. Let's get our ingredients together and let's start cooking. So this recipe calls for 1.5 pounds of fresh yellow squash. That's about 3 or 4 decent sized squash, or 2 16-ounce cans of squash, which would be a quart if you're using a mason jar. Salt and pepper, and 1 2-ounce jar of pimentos. This is a 4-ounce jar, but that just means I've got extra pimentos to make some pimento cheese for lunch tomorrow. And 1 medium onion chopped finely, 1 cup of sour cream, 1 can of cream of chicken soup, 4 small carrots grated, and 1 package of Pepperidge Farm cornbread stuffing. Now, I didn't use Pepperidge Farm, I just got the store brand, and it's only 6 ounces, whereas the Pepperidge Farm is 12 ounces. So you'll need 2 boxes if you're using a 6 ounce. If it's the 12 ounce though, just 1. And 1 half cup of margarine or butter. As we always note, I like to use real butter, melted. Okay, let's get started cooking. So the first thing it calls for is to cook squash in a small amount of water until tender. And so I'm slicing these. It doesn't have to be super fancy, you know, because we're going to, it's going to be mashed when we get done anyway. So we're going to chop them up, put them in the pot. We got our squash in the pot with just enough water so that when we put the lid on it and it gets to boiling, it'll steam it and get it kind of tender. And then we're going to put a little salt in it. And we're going to put it on the stove to get boiling. It'll take about 10 minutes or so before it's tender enough to just kind of mash. All right, and we'll get everything else ready while that's boiling. While the squash is boiling, the next bit of prep work we need to do is to chop our onion finely. And now I don't like to stand over a chopping board and just chop an onion into bitty bits. Instead, I like to go ahead and just peel it, cut it into, chunks, and stick it in the food processor over there to chop it up finely. Alternatively, I've seen some other versions of this recipe in which they call for sauteing the onion ahead of time. Either way, whether you chop it up or whether you saute it, a big part of it is just so that you don't have big chunks of crispy onion, your crispy half raw onion in your finished recipe. So whichever works for you. But we are going to put this in the food processor and get it nice and finely chopped so that it's good to just mix right in with our recipe. Okay, so we've already chopped up that one onion very fine. You can see it's in this bowl. And I went ahead and brought my food processor over here so you can see as we put the grater on it. Go ahead and stick as many of these 4 small carrots that we have, and let's go ahead and grate them in the food processor. All right, that food processor made pretty quick work of it, and now our squash should be just about ready to drain and mash as well. So let's check it out. Woo, it's boiling. Bring y'all over here so you can see. All right, check it out. It's boiling pretty good. All we got to do now is just take it off the eye, drain it, and mash it. I'll meet you back over here after I've drained it. Okay, we've got our cooked squash drained. As you can see, it's ready to mash. So I'm gonna grab my potato masher and just smush it all up. Get it all into nice, smushy little bits so it blends well with everything else. Smells wonderful. Man, vegetables just taste so much better when you cook them fresh from the garden. Okay, you can see that we have it now mashed, and now it says that we need to season to taste. So let's put a little sea salt and a little pepper. And then we're gonna start adding our other ingredients. It says stir in remaining ingredients, reserving half the stuffing, which has been mixed with the melted butter. So we'll start with adding the ingredients. So as I mentioned, this is a 4-ounce jar. So we're gonna pour about half of that jar of pimentos in there. I'm gonna make some pimento cheese. It's gonna be so good with the leftovers. Squash casserole tonight, pimento cheese tomorrow. All right, and then the onion. Let's pour that in there. Okay, and then we have 1 cup of sour cream. 1 cup of sour cream. So, I don't think I've got the lid off of this one yet. Nope. Let's peel that one back. There we go. And we're just gonna scoop a whole cup of sour cream out of there. So this is a 16 ounce. So if you get an 8 ounce, it's just the whole bit. But as it is, we're just gonna use half of this, and then we've got some sour cream for later. Maybe I'll have some baked potatoes with sour cream later. I'm making myself hungry. All right, and then 1 can of cream of chicken soup. There we go. And just put that in there. I always like using these a spatula like this instead of like a spoon or something. It just seems like you can get every last bit of something like soup, sour cream, peanut butter, stuff like that out when you can't necessarily do that with a metal spoon. So do that, and then we add our 4 small carrots. Oh, that one didn't get completely grated. All right. Go. Ooh, don't that look pretty? 4 small carrots, grated. Let's dump those in there. This has got so many good vegetables in it. Well, and also a lot of butter, but vegetables. All right. Okay, so we've got everything together except for the stuffing. So let's go ahead and stir it all together. the squash mixture. Ooh, here, so y'all can see. Ooh, it is a pretty color. Look at all those reds. I'm gonna bring y'all in here where y'all can see what it's looking like. Okay, so as you get to stirring, you can see that it's got all these pretty colors of yellow and cream and little flecks of red from the pimentos and orange from the carrots. And it sure is gonna be pretty. Okay, I think we're ready for the next step. So the way this is written is a little bit confusing, but the way that my grandma always made this was to add some of the stuffing in and then some of the stuffing on. And so that's what we're going to do too. Because it says to stir in the remaining ingredients, reserving half of the stuffing, which has been mixed with melted margarine. So half goes in here, and half we're going to mix with melted margarine for the crust and the topping. So let's stir in. Oh, it smells so good with all those herbs and seasonings. Oh, yeesh. Ooh, I got some on the fork there. All right. We're gonna mix this all up. Look at that. Yum. Mix in all that stuff and get it all good and mixed up. Man, we're gonna eat so good. All right, we got that mixed up good. We are going to now get ready to put it all in the pan and get ready to bake it. The next step says that we need to mix the reserved stuffing with the melted margarine. So remember, it was a half a cup of butter, which I use butter. I've already melted it. I'm just gonna dump this other bag of cornbread stuffing. I used cornbread. You can also use herb stuffing. I guess if you get adventurous, you can make your own stuffing too, but I just use the store-bought. So we're gonna mix this up until it is completely moistened. All the crumbs are. It'll start to get a little smushy, not like it would if you were actually making regular stuffing, but you know, it's not gonna be all crumbles and crunchiness once you get the margarine or the melted butter all mixed in. Okay, so once you've got that mixed together, it says line a casserole with the reserved stuffing, but you reserve some back to sprinkle on top. So I'm gonna put about half of this in here. Just dump it in. There we go. And just sort of pat it, and that way we want to have plenty to have a nice topping on top. So we're gonna pat it in. Let's see, I'll bring y'all in here so you can see what I'm doing. All right, you see, and you can actually even do that with your hand. You just pat it in so you've got a little bit, almost like a crust, but it's not gonna be a solid crust like if you were, you know, baking a pie or something. Okay, and so then you just pour the rest of this squash casserole stuffing on top, or, you know, filling with all the squash and the yumminess, and just pat it out to where it's evenly spread out. It's gonna be, there we go. It's gonna be pretty easy to spread, especially, you know, now since your squash is all soft, it spreads almost just like spreading some brownie batter. All right, get all that out of there, spread it evenly. All right, and then, let's put this up here, and then you just put your little topping on top. So get your crumbs and just sprinkle them around until it's all pretty evenly colored, because everybody, as we mentioned before, you can't have a good casserole without some kind of topping. Either it's gonna be cheese or it's gonna be something crunchy, or preferably both. And so in this case, and usually it's something that is crunchy and starchy, soaked with something fat. So you're gonna talk about Ritz crackers soaked in butter, or in this case, stuffing soaked in butter. Just makes it good. Okay, this is looking delightful. I can't wait to eat this. Okay, this is what it looks like before I put it in the oven. And really, we're not cooking it. Mostly we're just ensuring that it's heated through, because everything in here is actually cooked. I could eat it right now, but it's gonna be a lot better when it's getting hot. So we're gonna put it in the oven at 350 degrees, which I've already got mine preheating to 350 degrees, and we're gonna bake it for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna see if it's all nice and bubbly and brown and ready to eat. Let's put it in the oven. Okay, our timer is going off. Let's see how that squash casserole is looking. Ooh, look at that. That looks delicious. Oh my gosh, it smells amazing. Okay, we're gonna set it out to cool, and we're gonna give it a taste test. Okay, let's see how this squash casserole turned out. We're gonna give it a taste test. Let's see here. All right, ooh, look at there. Can you see that? Oh, look at the steam rising. Doesn't that look good? Okay, we're gonna set it on the plate. You can see it's kind of crusty on the top. It's pretty solid. It's not runny. If it's runny, you didn't do it quite right. Okay, let's give it a test. Let's see how it tastes. That is a perfect blend of savory goodness and fresh squash and creaminess and all kinds of good stuff. This would be a great dish to have for your Thanksgiving meal if you put up your squash that you got this summer. But tonight it's gonna be a great meal with just some fresh vegetables out of the garden. You don't even need any meat when you got something like this. Oh my goodness, this is so good. Joining me once again for Cooking in Cotton Country. I hope you give this recipe a try. Letting me know how it goes. Maybe you have a new appreciation for the wonderful squash after today. If there's something you want me to try cooking, let me know. I would like to try some new recipes and see what else we can find in this book. And until then, enjoy your meals and enjoy your day. Thanks a lot.